There was a phase where everything went quiet and nothing made sense. No movement, no feedback, no visible progress. Just space and you in it. That's where most people lose control. They force something, chase something, break their own alignment just to feel movement again. But you didn't. You stayed grounded when nothing responded. You held your focus without proof. You didn't rush to escape the silence. And that's exactly what changed your position. Because that silence wasn't empty. It was selective. It filtered everything that wasn't stable and left only what could hold. And you held. That's why things feel different now. That's why your awareness is sharper, your reactions are calmer, your direction feels clearer. It's not random. You passed the silent test, and what that unlocked is already active. 1. The moment everything stopped moving, everything slowed down without warning. Actions that once created visible results began to return nothing. Effort met silence. The movement lost its immediate response. It felt as if the system had paused its feedback completely. This was not a breakdown. It was a shift in how movement was being processed. Progress has always been measured through visible outcomes. You act, something responds, and that response confirms direction. When that loop disappears, the mind looks for ways to restore it. It pushes for reaction, searches for signs, and tries to force motion just to feel control again. That is where instability begins. Because action driven by urgency is not aligned, it is reactive. But something different happened within you. The absence of response didn't push you into random movement. It revealed the difference between action and alignment. You began to notice that not all motion is progress. Some movement is only noise created to escape stillness. And that recognition changed your position. Silence started to show you what was stable and what wasn't. Focus without reinforcement became visible. Direction without validation became necessary. Clarity without confirmation became the only reference point. Every unstable pattern surfaced. Any dependency on feedback became obvious. Any scattered attention revealed itself. Any inconsistency in your state could no longer hide behind activity. Nothing was covering it anymore. This is where recalibration happens. Not on the surface, but at the level where your internal state defines everything. Movement shifts from visible action to internal alignment. The system stops responding until the signal becomes stable enough to hold. That is why nothing moved. Not because nothing was happening, but because the response required precision. Without external feedback, your state became the only source of direction. Decisions had to come from clarity, not reaction. Focus had to remain steady without being reinforced. Your position had to hold without proof. This removed all dependence. Control began to return from within, not from what was happening outside. Time also felt different. Without visible results, there was no immediate measurement of progress. That space exposed how much of your movement depended on quick feedback. Once that dependency dropped, consistency replaced urgency. And consistency builds a different kind of momentum. This phase was not about doing more. It was about becoming stable enough to operate without response. Because real control is not proven when everything is moving. It is proven when nothing is. When there is no reaction to rely on, no signal to follow, no confirmation to guide the next step, only your internal state remains. Everything else adjusts around it. Silence was not empty. It was selective. It filtered out reactions driven by urgency. It removed patterns that depended on validation. It isolated your true operating level and made it visible. What remained was clarity. What remained was control. What remained was alignment that no longer needed immediate results to continue. That is when the system begins to respond differently, not to effort, but to stability, not to force, but to precision. Movement returns, but it follows a clear signal, not scattered action. Everything that felt paused was actually being refined. Everything that felt still was preparing a more direct path. And once that internal position stabilized, movement was no longer something to chase. It became something that followed you. 2. You held your position without forcing outcomes. Pressure usually appears when results are not visible. When nothing responds, the system around you seems quiet, and the natural impulse is to create movement. The mind looks for ways to push something forward, to trigger a reaction, to break the stillness just to confirm that progress is still happening. That impulse is not random. It comes from dependency on outcomes. If results define direction, then the absence of results creates tension. That tension pushes action, but not from clarity. It pushes action from discomfort. Movement begins to lose precision and becomes an attempt to escape uncertainty. This is where most people shift out of alignment. They increase effort, change direction quickly, or react to temporary signals. The focus moves away from stability and into control. They try to make something happen rather than allowing the right movement to form. But something different occurred within you. The absence of response did not lead to forced action. It revealed the difference between movement and control. You recognized that not all action creates progress. Some actions only disrupt alignment. So, you held your position, not as hesitation, not inaction, but as controlled stillness. Your direction did not change just because there was no immediate feedback. Your focus remained steady even when there was nothing reinforcing it. You did not shift your state to match the silence. You maintained your internal position regardless of what was happening externally. This is where real strength develops. Because holding a position requires clarity without support, it requires stability without confirmation. It requires trust in your internal state without needing external proof. Every moment without response became a test of consistency, not a test of effort, not a test of speed, a test of whether your signal could remain stable without reacting. And your signal held. You did not create unnecessary movement. You did not adjust your direction under pressure. You did not react to temporary absence as if it was failure. You stayed aligned. That decision changed everything, because alignment strengthens when it is maintained without interruption. Each moment of stability builds precision. Each moment without reaction removes noise. Each moment of holding position increases control. The system begins to recognize consistency. When action is no longer driven by pressure, it becomes directed. When movement is no longer forced, it becomes efficient. When focus is no longer scattered, it becomes clear. This is how access forms. Not by pushing harder, but by becoming stable enough that movement happens without resistance. Holding position also removes unnecessary variables. When you do not react to every shift, you stop introducing noise into your own path. You allow processes to complete without interference. You allow alignment to deepen without being disrupted by urgency. That creates a clean signal, and a clean signal produces clear results. Another shift happens at the level of control. Before, control may have felt like the ability to change outcomes quickly. Now, control is the ability to remain steady when outcomes are not visible. That level of control is not dependent on circumstances. It is internal. And internal control is what determines direction. Because when you are not reacting, you are choosing. When you are not forcing, you are aligning. When you are not chasing outcomes, you are positioning yourself to receive them naturally. This is not passive. It is precisa. You moved only when movement matched clarity. You paused when movement would have created noise. Every decision came from alignment rather than pressure. That is what created strength in your position. So, when nothing responded, your response did not become unstable. It became focused. You held your position without forcing outcomes. And that is exactly what allowed the system to adjust around you. Because once your signal remained consistent, outcomes no longer needed to be chased. They became a direct response to your alignment. 3. You stopped needing constant signals. A phase arrived where external guidance became minimal. Feedback reduced. Signs that once directed your next step were no longer present in the same way. The environment stopped providing continuous confirmation. This exposed a deeper pattern. When direction depends on signals, movement becomes reactive. Each action follows a response. Each decision waits for indication. The process appears controlled, but it is dependent. Without signals, Direction collapses. That dependency dissolved within you. The absence of signals did not create confusion. It revealed that your movement could exist without constant input. You recognize that direction does not require continuous confirmation when internal clarity is stable. This shifted your reference point. Attention moved away from searching for signs and settled into observation. You began to notice that signals are not always meant to guide. Sometimes they are removed to strengthen internal positioning. Without them, your state becomes the only source of direction. This is where alignment deepens. Decisions no longer required repeated validation. Focus no longer needed reinforcement. You did not adjust your path based on every change in the environment. Instead, you maintained a steady direction that did not depend on immediate feedback. That stability created precision. Without constant signals, noise is reduced. External input stopped interrupting your internal process. You could observe without reacting, understand without overanalyzing, and move without waiting. Clarity formed naturally, not as something forced, but as something revealed when interference dropped. Your awareness became sharper because it was not divided between multiple sources. You were not switching direction based on temporary input. You were holding a consistent signal. This changed how you interpreted situations. Uncertainty would trigger a search for answers. Now, uncertainty has become neutral. It did not demand immediate resolution. It allowed space for your internal state to guide the next step. This removed urgency. Urgency creates scattered movement. It pushes action without alignment. Without the need for constant signals, urgency lost its influence. Movement became controlled, deliberate, and efficient. Another shift occurred in trust. You began to rely on your internal sense of direction, not as an assumption, but as a stable reference. You did not need repeated confirmation to continue. You moved because your position was clear, not because something external told you to move. This is where authority develops. Not authority over others, but authority over your own direction. External signals no longer define your path. They became secondary. Your internal state became primary. That change increased consistency. When direction is internally driven, it does not fluctuate with every external shift. It remains stable. Actions follow a clear pattern. Focus remains directed. Results begin to reflect that consistency. You also became selective with input. Not every signal required attention. Not every piece of information required a response. You filtered what entered your awareness. This reduced distraction and preserved clarity. Your signal became cleaner. A clean signal produces clear outcomes. There is less interference, less confusion, less unnecessary movement. Everything becomes more direct. This is not isolation. It is refined. You are not ignoring the environment. You are no longer dependent on it for direction. You observe, but you do not rely on it. You move, but you do not wait for it. So, when signals are reduced, your movement did not stop. It became independent. You stopped needing constant signals, and that is what allowed your direction to stabilize without interruption. 4. Your reactions lost their control. A shift occurred in how impulses move through you. Events still appear, words are still heard, situations still change, yet the automatic surge that once followed instant emotion, instant response, no longer takes over in the same way. The gap between stimulus and response has widened, and within that space, control has returned. Reactions are patterns. They form through repetition. A trigger appears, the mind associates it with past experience, and the body follows with a familiar response. This loop runs quickly, often without awareness. It creates the sense that reactions are unavoidable, but they are not fixed. They are conditioned. When awareness increases, that conditioning becomes visible. You begin to notice the moment a reaction starts to form, not after it has already taken control, but at the point where it begins to rise. That is where the shift happens. Moving instantly with the reaction, you observe it. You see the thought forming. You feel the emotional surge building. You recognize the pattern before it completes. This interrupts the loop. The reaction no longer defines the outcome. It becomes information rather than instruction. That is the difference. Before, a reaction would lead directly to action. Now, it passes through awareness first. That single change alters everything. It removes automatic behavior and replaces it with deliberate response. This is not suppression. Nothing is being pushed down or ignored. The signal is still present, but it does not control your movement. You allow it to exist without letting it decide your next step. This creates stability. When reactions lose control, your state becomes consistent. External changes no longer create internal chaos. You do not rise and fall with every situation. You remain steady, regardless of what appears. This steadiness changes how situations unfold. When you do not react automatically, you do not amplify unnecessary tension. You do not add energy to what does not require it. You respond only where it matters, and that keeps your signal clear. Clarity reduces noise. Noise creates distortion. Without distortion, your decisions become precise. You begin to choose your responses based on alignment rather than impulse. You engage when there is purpose. You remain still when engagement would create imbalance. Every action becomes intentional. This also changes your energy distribution. Reactions consume energy quickly. They scatter attention and pull focus in multiple directions. When reactions lose control, that energy remains contained. It becomes available for directed movement rather than being lost to unnecessary response. Containment strengthens presence. Presence is not created by intensity. It is created by stability. When your state does not fluctuate with every trigger, your presence becomes grounded. Others can sense it, even without words. Situations adjust around it. Another shift happens in perception. Without immediate reaction, you see more. You notice details that were previously missed. You understand intent without confusion. You interpret situations with greater accuracy. This increases precision in your decisions. Precision reduces error. Error often comes from reacting before understanding. When you allow awareness to lead, your responses match the situation instead of distorting it. This becomes your default. You do not have to remind yourself to pause. The pause exists naturally. You do not have to control every reaction. Control is already present. Your system operates from awareness rather than impulse. This is where real control exists. Not in controlling everything outside of you, but in controlling how you respond to it. External conditions continue to change, but your internal state remains stable. That stability creates consistency in your actions. Consistency creates alignment. Alignment produces clear results. So when reactions lost their control, nothing was taken away. Something was returned. Your ability to choose. Your ability to remain steady. Your ability to respond with precision. And from that position, every action carries more weight, not because it is stronger, but because it is no longer scattered. 5. Your presence became stable. A quiet change took place in how you hold yourself. Not louder, not more forceful, more consistent. Presence is not something you add on top. It is the result of how steady your internal state remains across different conditions. When that state fluctuates, presence becomes inconsistent. When that state stabilizes, presence becomes reliable. Earlier, your state could shift quickly. A small change in the environment could pull your focus. A reaction from someone else could influence your mood. An unexpected outcome could interrupt your direction. Each shift was subtle, but it created variation. Your attention moved, your energy scattered, and your signal changed from moment to moment. That variation reduced clarity. When the signal changes frequently, the system around you cannot read it with precision. Results become mixed. Interactions become unpredictable. Direction loses definition. Then stability increased. You began to hold the same internal position regardless of what appeared. Situations changed, but your state did not shift with them. Input was received, but it did not override your baseline. This is where presence becomes stable. Stability is not rigidity, it is continuity. You remain responsive, but not reactive. You adjust when needed, but you do not lose your center. Your attention stays directed, and your energy stays contained. Containment is important. When energy is not scattered, it accumulates. When it accumulates, the presence gains weight, not through intensity, but through consistency. Others sense it as calm, clarity. Situations respond to it because it does not fluctuate. This creates influence without force. You do not need to push for impact. Your presence carries it naturally. Decisions made from this state are direct. Actions taken from this state are efficient. There is no excess movement, no unnecessary expression. Everything becomes precise. Another shift occurs in timing. With a stable presence, you recognize when to act and when to remain still. There is no urgency to fill space with action. There is no delay caused by uncertainty. Movement happens at the point where it aligns, not before and not after. This removes friction. Friction often comes from acting too early or too late. Stability reduces that error. Your internal state provides a consistent reference, so timing becomes accurate. This also changes how you process external input. Information enters, but it does not disrupt your position. You evaluate without absorbing everything. You listen without losing your direction. Your state remains intact, while your awareness expands. This separation is critical. It allows you to engage without being influenced unnecessarily. You are present in the environment, but not controlled by it. That independence strengthens your signal. A strong signal produces clear outcomes. Clarity in outcomes reinforces stability. This creates a cycle where each reinforces the other. The more stable your presence becomes, the more consistent your results become. The more consistent your results, the more stable your presence remains. This becomes your default. You do not need to maintain it consciously. It holds on its own. Your state does not depend on conditions. It operates consistently across different situations. This is where real control exists. Not in controlling events, but in maintaining a stable internal position regardless of events. External variables continue to change, but your presence does not fluctuate with them. That constancy creates direction. Direction creates progress. Progress becomes steady because it is no longer interrupted by internal shifts. So when your presence became stable, nothing external needed to change for your experience to shift. Your signal became clear. Your energy remained contained. Your actions became precise. And from that position, everything began to respond in a more direct and consistent way. 6. Your movement became intentional. Movement used to come from impulse. A thought appeared and action followed. A feeling rose and direction changed. The system reacted quickly, often without a clear reference point. Activity increased, yet progress did not always match the effort. That pattern shifted. Action is no longer automatic. It is selected. Each step now comes from a defined position. You recognize what aligns before you move. You recognize what does not align and leave it without engagement. This removes unnecessary activity and preserves direction. Intentional movement is not slow. It is precise. Precision reduces error. Error often comes from acting before understanding. When understanding leads, action becomes efficient. Fewer steps create stronger results because each step carries purpose. This changes how you use energy. Before, energy was distributed across multiple directions. Attention moved quickly, and each shift created a new path. That created fragmentation. Fragmentation reduces impact. Now, energy is directed. Focus stays on one path long enough to produce effect. The signal remains consistent. Consistency strengthens output. Output becomes measurable because it is not interrupted. This is how momentum forms. Not through speed, but through continuity. Continuity requires alignment. When thought, decision, and action operate together, movement becomes stable. There is no internal conflict, no repeated reconsideration, no delay caused by uncertainty. Decisions close quickly. Once a direction is clear, it does not reopen for debate. This removes internal noise. Noise slows movement. Silence within the process allows action to continue without interruption. This also refines timing. Action no longer happens to escape stillness. It happens when alignment is present. This creates accuracy. Acting too early creates distortion. Acting too late reduces opportunity. Intentional movement occurs at the point where both clarity and timing meet. This balance increases effectiveness. Another change appears in how you evaluate outcomes. Before, outcomes defined your next move. A result would trigger adjustment, often without considering alignment. Now, outcomes are observed, not reacted to. You assess without shifting your position unnecessarily. This maintains direction. Direction is more important than temporary results. When direction remains stable, results compound. When direction changes frequently, results reset. Intentional movement protects direction. It also reduces dependency on external signals. You do not need constant feedback to continue. Your internal state provides the reference. This creates independence. Independence allows movement to continue without interruption. Your system becomes self-directed. This does not remove awareness of the environment. It refines how you interact with it. You observe patterns, recognize opportunities, and engage only when alignment is present. This prevents wasted effort. Effort becomes targeted. Targeted effort produces stronger impact than repeated, unfocused action. This becomes automatic. You do not force yourself to be intentional. You operate from a state where intention is the default. Each decision carries clarity. Each action carries direction. Each pause carries purpose. This is a different level of movement, not driven by urgency, not driven by reaction, driven by alignment. Alignment creates access. Access creates results. Results reinforce alignment. So, when your movement became intentional, you did not lose speed. You gained precision. You did not reduce action. You removed unnecessary action. You did not wait for the right moment. You recognized it. And from that point, every step began to carry weight, because it was no longer random. It was directed. 7. You came out different without announcement. Change did not arrive with noise. No clear marker. No visible transition. No moment where everything declared itself at once. Yet something is different. The difference is not in appearance. It is in operation. The way you process, decide, and respond has shifted. The system you are running now is not the same as before, even though the environment may look similar. This is how real transformation occurs. It does not require announcement because it is not dependent on recognition. It forms internally, stabilizes, and then begins to influence everything outward from that position. Before this shift, identity could fluctuate. Responses changed based on conditions. Decisions adjusted based on external input. Focus moved with whatever demanded attention. This created variation. Variation weakens direction because the signal changes constantly. When the signal is inconsistent, results cannot stabilize. That instability is no longer present in the same way. Your baseline has changed. Reactions no longer define your movement. External input no longer determines your direction. Attention no longer shifts without intention. The system has recalibrated. This recalibration did not require a visible event. It required consistency under conditions where nothing reinforced it. That consistency built a new operating level. Now, actions originate from that level. They are not forced. They are not reactive. They are selected with clarity. This creates a different kind of presence. Not louder, not more expressive, more stable. Stability is what signals change. Others may not identify it immediately, but they respond to it. Interactions adjust. Outcomes shift. Opportunities align differently. This is not a coincidence. It is a response to a clearer signal. You do not need to explain this shift. Explanation is not required when the signal is consistent. The system around you reads stability more accurately than words. When your state holds, everything that interacts with it begins to adjust. Another change appears in how you relate to your past patterns. They are still visible, but they no longer have the same influence. The pull is weaker, the response is slower. The control they once held has reduced. This does not require effort. It is a result of operating from a different level. When the baseline changes, Previous patterns lose priority. They exist, but they do not lead. This is where separation occurs. You are no longer identified with every thought or reaction. You observe them without becoming them. That separation creates space. Space allows selection. Selection creates control. Control stabilizes identity. Identity no longer shifts with every condition. It holds. And when identity holds, direction becomes clear. There is no constant adjustment, no repeated reset. Movement continues from a consistent point. This is why the change did not need to be announced. It was not a temporary state, it was a structural shift. Structural shifts do not require attention. They operate whether they are noticed or not. The results become visible over time, not because they were declared, but because they were established. You also begin to notice that validation is no longer required. You do not need others to confirm what has changed. You do not need visible proof to continue operating from this level. The recognition is internal, and that is enough to maintain direction. This removes dependency. Dependency creates fluctuation. Independence creates stability. Your system is now self-referenced. Decisions come from within. Movement is directed from within. Consistency is maintained from within. This is a different mode of operation. It does not rely on external confirmation. It does not adjust based on temporary conditions. It remains steady because the source is stable. So, when you came out different, nothing needed to be said. No announcement was required. The shift is visible through precision, through consistency, through the absence of unnecessary movement, and through the way everything begins to respond. Because when the signal changes at its core, the system around it adjusts automatically. You did not become different by declaring it. You became different by stabilizing it. And from that point, everything follows. You don't need to question it anymore. That phase you went through wasn't random, and it wasn't wasted, it refined you. It removed the need for constant reaction, constant noise, constant confirmation, and what remains now is different. More stable, more clear, more controlled. That's why things feel different. Your decisions are sharper, your presence carries more weight, your direction feels more certain. You didn't just go through silence, you held through it, and that changed your position. So don't step out of it now. Don't rush to prove anything. Stay aligned with what you've built internally, because this isn't the beginning. This is what comes after you're ready. You passed the silent test. Now move like it.